said hi.
Oh, hi, Neil. Hey, Neil. Okay, welcome to everyone who's sitting here with me tonight in class, and to those of you who are watching online. My name is Alan McCray, and this is Understanding the Minor Arcana of Egyptian Tarot. Before I get started, I have a couple of announcements to make. I'd like to talk about the classes. Yvette Fortin's Esoteric Psychology class has been a big hit. She has 2 more sessions. She's been doing those on Sundays between 3 and 5. And her last 2 classes are on the 22nd and the 29th of August. Astrological Indicators for Success is a series of 6 classes given by Christopher Gibson on Thursday evenings, beginning September 9th and running through October 14th. On Sundays, Vega Osiki is hosting a local conversation class that is not streamed online, but it's called Building Blocks of Astrology. My class, I need to announce, was scheduled for 6 weeks, and it looks like it's going to be 3 weeks. So I want to make that announcement in case everyone has donated for 6 weeks. If you have, please let us know, and we will refund you or credit you for another class. If that's whatever you want to do is fine. There are no handouts this evening. The handouts are available to you to download at Church of Light TV. The reason why there aren't any handouts is because they are 40 pages long. And so I should tell you that everything that you see in text on the screen, you will have in your notes, so you don't have to worry about writing anything down. However, when you see artwork on the screen, start writing, because I didn't make any notes for the mythological stories connected with these cards. I never know what's going to appeal to one person and the other. So it's up to you to find those key words and passages that mean something to you. We'll have a 10-minute break about 7:30, and with that, I think I will start the class. This evening, we will be reviewing the overall architecture of the Brotherhood of Light deck to illustrate how all the pieces fit together and how components of the Brotherhood of Light deck correspond to astrology. And then we'll be moving on to the minors. It is said in our tradition that astrology is the golden key to character development and that tarot is the silver key. Astrology as a whole corresponds to the sun, and tarot corresponds to the moon, which reflects the light of the sun. In other words, tarot in the Brotherhood of Light tradition is a symbolic translation of astrology. Now, this symbol down here is obviously a picture of a golden key and the silver key. It's a very old symbol. It's a Hermetic symbol, and it has been sort of taken over by Christianity. And when I was growing up as a Catholic, I remember seeing these 2 keys on the walls. I never knew what they meant, of course, and learned later that they later became a symbol for the Pope. It is a papal symbol. And whenever I asked about it, I was always given this quote from the Bible, and I'll read here. Jesus entrusted a specific authority to Peter. Peter was the founder, by the way, of Catholicism. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And when you read that, it makes us think about as above, so below. It's really a Hermetic thought or idea that comes to us through Matthew. It is said in our tradition.
We've got a bright spot right in the middle of the screen, and it's real bright, and you can't see the words at the bottom.
Well, I don't know what to do that unless we can move this light somehow away from it. I don't think
there's anything shining on it.
Oh, you know what? That'll change. I'm looking at this format here in the slide, and it'll change.
Oh, okay.
It'll change as time goes on, and I'll remember that in the future. It is said in our tradition that astrology is the golden key to character development. Did I just do this one? Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Here we are. What is Egyptian tarot? When the subject of tarot comes up in conversation, I'm often asked, what is the difference between Egyptian tarot and regular tarot? And I always say, well, I teach a 6-week course on that, so how much time do you have? and then I give them the short answer, which is there are 2 major differences. The first one is that every component of Egyptian tarot corresponds to astrology in some way. And 2, there are a number of differences in how the minors are interpreted. In the first place, our minors are not pictorial. Pictured minors were first featured in the Rider-Waite deck, published in 1909 and illustrated by Pamela Coleman Smith here. The vast majority of tarot decks that followed based the interpretation of the minors on Pamela Coleman Smith's images. Many people prefer pictured minors, of course, because they are easier to remember and they're more visual, and sometimes considered better triggers for intuitive insight. Older decks of tarot, however, the minors are illustrated by patterns of spots on the cards corresponding to their suit or element, as the pip cards are illustrated in our regular playing cards. As a matter of fact, today's playing cards are a direct descendant of tarot or tarocchi, minus all but one major arcanum, the Fool, which is now the Joker, and minus the 4 horsemen. So if you were to learn the Egyptian tradition of tarot, you could read pretty well with just a regular deck of playing cards. Of course, you wouldn't be playing with a full deck. But that's how the Eastern European gypsies have told fortunes for many centuries. Are these older minors as visual as the minors of the more modern decks? Well, no. But they certainly do trigger intuitive insight just the same, and moreover, they provide a reliable system.
My question would be, do the images on, say, the Rider-Waite deck, do they capture the imagination and in a way that maybe the Brotherhood of Light minors would allow your mind to be more expansive, or the imagery would be more...
As a user of both decks, I would say yes. I think a different part of the brain is used when you're working with the images. But there's a good and bad side to that, because when your intuition isn't working, and sometimes it's not, then with our system, you actually have a system to rely upon, which was the last sentence in my part here. After all, you know, our intuition isn't always reliable, and with our deck, we have a system to rely on. We have, we have the mythological stories, we have keywords, we have the astrological signatures that tell us about what's going on if it doesn't. And over the course of time, working with our cards, you do develop a sense of intuition around them. You get to figure out sometimes what meaning is the most appropriate under certain circumstances. I wanted to just point out before we leave here that this is the Marseille deck. You can see that's the Queen of Spades there, and that is the Hanged Man. And these are their minors. Scepter, which is a club, literally, and the 3 of Cups. Over here we have the Knapp Hall deck, which is a Hermetic deck. It comes much later than the Marseille deck. It comes around the turn of the last century, and he uses patterns much like we do in our deck. The second difference between most decks and the Brotherhood of Light deck is that the elements are assigned to the suits of our minors differently than in most decks. In the Brotherhood of Light tradition, the element of water is represented by the cups, and the element of fire is represented by the scepters, or what many people call the wands. And so far, so good. But we depart from many other traditions in that our element of air is represented by the coins, pentacles, and our element of earth is represented by the swords. And I'll go over why this is so in the Egyptian tradition later on this evening, actually. The Egyptian minors have inner and outer meanings, and that is the third difference between Egyptian tarot and other systems. Other systems have many meanings like our meanings have, but they don't have spiritual meanings associated with them necessarily. Some authors have connected spiritual meanings to their decks. And the outer meaning and the inner meanings are what will be covered in depth throughout this course. Last fall, I taught a class in Egyptian tarot, and some of this evening's discussion will be a review of that class, which is archived for your convenience at Church of Light TV. During that class, we briefly went over how the minors were interpreted, but I could not go into great detail on the minors within the confines of that particular course. So that's why we're offering this course tonight, so that we can really go into a thorough explanation. Are there any questions so far?
So is this also more traditional? I mean, does this come from tradition, the assignment of the meanings, or as opposed to
both of them are traditions. They're just different. Ours is an older tradition.
Oh, okay.
Because ours comes. You know that our deck has an ancient history,
Right.
And somewhere along the line, and it was probably with Pamela Coleman Smith back at the turn of the last, with the publication of the Rider-Waite deck, that sort of all changed, because she was the first one to put those pictures on there.
Okay.
And after that, everything sort of changed around, and people forgot that in the older traditions like our own, we don't rely on pictures. We rely on astrological correspondences. Okay. So I would like to start by reviewing the other components of the Brotherhood of Light deck and how they correspond to astrology. We begin with, of course, the major arcana. There are 22 cards in the major arcana. Each card of the major arcana corresponds to either a planet, there being 10, or zodiacal sign, there being 12, for a total of 22. Each card of the major arcana also corresponds to Hebrew, Egyptian, or an English letter, a number, a color, occult science, a metal, musical tone, and the list goes on and on. Woo! So that's a lot to remember. But the good news is that you can always refer to C.C. Zane's Sacred Tarot for a complete list of correspondences of all the cards of the major arcana. There are many, many traditions of tarot, and literally a million decks in existence right now around the world, which is so surprising. Most of these decks have a major arcana of 22 cards, and most of them are interpreted in much the same way. But most, if not all, of the decks vary as to their astrological correspondences and other correspondences. Naturally, because these are called the major arcana, these cards represent more powerful energies or forces than the minor arcana. Each card of the major arcana is rich in symbolism, may be interpreted on many levels, and are given more importance in a reading than the minor arcana. The minor arcana, as they relate to the major arcana, symbolize more day-to-day issues, the mundane or exoteric meanings. The esoteric meanings or deeper meanings of the minor arcana correspond to the spiritual teachings of the decadence of the zodiac. There are 36 decadents, 3 in each of the 12 signs of the zodiac, and the bulk of this course will focus on these inner meanings of the minor arcana. The court cards in the Egyptian tradition, including kings, queens, and youth. For those of you who are familiar with other decks, you may be wondering why I don't mention the knights here. That's because in Egyptian tarot, the knights are called horsemen, and they are not considered members of the court cards. The 4 kings, 4 queens, and 4 youths, totaling 12 cards, correspond to the 12 signs of the zodiac. They represent the people in our lives as described by their zodiacal personalities. Depending on whether they are right side up or upside down will indicate whether they are male or female. And this is the greatest difference I have found, one of the greatest differences I have found in using our system. You can get so lost in the court cards of other traditions. You have no idea, about the people. They show up and you say, oh my gosh, I have no idea what's going on here. Please, God, don't let any court cards turn up on the screen. And honestly, but in our system, we know whether they're male or female right away, and we know what their personality is like. And if we describe that personality, most of the time the querent knows who you're talking about. The horsemen, as I mentioned before, are not considered court cards. Even though they look like they might represent people, the horsemen actually symbolize thoughts. I sure hope I'm on the right slide, but I'll figure it out.
I think you are. You seem to be following.
Yeah. Right side up, the thoughts are interpreted as positive, and upside down, the thoughts are interpreted as negative. Again, wonderful, wonderful part of our system of reading cards. If a horseman should show up in a spread next to or near a court card, then it is generally read that the thoughts are coming from the person represented by that court card. If there are no court cards in the spread, then it is possible that the thoughts of those are those of the querent. There are 4 horsemen in a deck. These are generally called knights in other decks, and they correspond to the 4 elements of fire, air, water, and earth. The 10s in the Brotherhood of Light deck are not considered part of the minor arcana, as they are in older decks. The 10s correspond to major arcana 10, the wheel, sometimes called the Wheel of Fortune, which is ruled by Uranus, the planet of sudden changes. The 4 10s accordingly also represent change and correspond to the changes of our 4 seasons, which I think makes perfect sense. Even though the 10s are not considered part of the minor arcana, we will have a chance to explore the 10s more thoroughly later on in this course. So to review, this is the slide, and I think I've pointed out everything here. The minor arcana corresponds to the decadence of the major arcana corresponds to the 10 planets and 12 signs. The minor arcana correspond to the decadence of the zodiac. The court cards correspond to the 12 signs of the zodiac. The horsemen correspond to the 4 elements of the zodiac, and the 10s correspond to the 4 seasons. Again, this information is a quick review from my class, Beginning Egyptian Tarot, which you may access anytime at Church of Light TV, where you are right now. And that's why that little blurb is down there at the bottom, to remind everybody. Before we jump into the main body of this course and begin to discuss the minors in detail, are there any questions about what we've covered so far? I'd like to, yes, Paul.
Does everybody know what the decadents are?
Well, we're going to go through that.
Okay.
In great detail, actually. I'd like to remind everybody that if you see it on the screen and it's in print, it is available to you to download from your computer, download on your computer. And when you see slides that just have pictures on them, that's when I want you to take diligent notes, okay? I had a heck of a time doing this. I need a lot of help from a dear friend of mine who I think you might all know and love. The minors, 1 through 9 are anchored to the minors 1 through, the majors 1 through 9. This slide shows us how the minors relate to the major arcanum 1 through 9. You can see here that the aces or ones, and I'm going to point way down here to this group. The aces or ones correspond to major arcanum 1, the magus. The deuces correspond to major arcanum 2, veiled Ices. The threes to major arcanum 3, Ices unveiled, and so forth through the nines. The 10s are a bit different, but we'll talk about the 10s in depth as well. You will note that each card of the minor carries a suit with it. We have the coins, scepters, cups, and swords. In the spring, the winds blow, spreading pollen, fecundating the earth, and bringing forth new growth. The winds, or the element of air, blow in currents. The only other element that travels in currents is water, and that element is taken up by the cups. And almost in every deck, you will see water and cups go together. Besides water, there are 2 nouns that we can attach to currents. One is money. Money travels. It has to move from one person to another, from one place to another, to be useful. Money even has another name, currency. What else travels through the Ethernet? Why, that would be ideas. Ideas travel. Ideas are exchanged moment to moment, and of course, ideas include social exchange, news, and even gossip. So the element of air has become associated with coins, also known as pentacles, ideas, social exchange, money, and new beginnings. At some point in history, wealth became symbolized by diamonds, as seen today in our playing cards. In the summertime, we experience heat, which in olden times was associated with fuel and, more specifically, the flames of burning wood. In the summer, the fields are plentiful, and there is an abundance of grasses and clover for the livestock to graze. We associate heat with passion, personal interests, authority, careers, reputation, enthusiasm, and power. In the Brotherhood of Light tradition, the scepter, or wand, symbolizes the element of fire and the heat of passion and authority. Ultimately, the symbol of the heat of summer came to be symbolized by the trefoil of the fields, the clover, or the club. And in some decks, it is actually a club. Well, we saw that earlier in the Marseille deck with the big stump of, that looked like a club. Fall is the time of harvest, abundance, celebration, and family. It is a time of the year when cups of wine are raised in moments of cheer and goodwill towards men. It can be a time of love, joy, and peace, and also a time of family tension, sibling rivalry, and feelings of disappointment. In other words, the fall is an emotional time, as symbolized by the cup and the element of water. In today's playing cards, the cup has been replaced by the heart. Finally, in the dead of winter, the animals hibernate, the leaves have fallen from the trees and the ground is frozen with ice. All is crystallized and quieted. Food is difficult to find, and many will perish from the severities of the weather, from illness, or from starvation. Any food that might be available will be tubers or roots buried deep within the hardened soil. Strife and the hardships of the human experience is represented by the sword and the element of earth. The sword became the spade that was used to dig for food, and to this day, the ace of spades and the queen of spades have been associated with unfortunate events. If one calls a spade, it is meant that the truth must be told in spite of its harsh reality. And so it is that the elements are assigned. And to summarize, and I don't know if I have no, I don't. And to summarize, the coins represent the element of air, money, ideas, gossip, news, and new beginnings. The scepters represent the element of fire, passion, personal interest, hobbies, authority, power, and reputation. The cups represent the element of water and emotions, both good and bad. And the sword represents the element of earth, strife, hardship, poverty, and illness. The majors are like prisms. I got this is a spin-off from Vega's idea about dropping a rock into the pond and the rings coming out. And I started thinking about that for a minute, and I thought, well, what other analogy can we use? And I came up with this one. Let's think of Arcanum 1 as a crystal through which a beam of light is shining. Let's imagine for a moment that the first spectrum is that light through the prism of fire. The second spectrum is that light through the prism of water. And the third spectrum is that light through the prism of air. And the fourth spectrum is that light through the prism of earth. The outer meanings of the minors. We know that the suits of the minors give us a specific spectrum through which to consider the possible outer meanings of the minors as they relate to their corresponding major. And at this point, it is assumed that you have a pretty good understanding of the majors. A brief description will be given, but if more information about the majors is needed, please refer to my previous class, Beginning Egyptian Tarot, which is archived at Church of Light TV. And also refer to Sacred Tarot by C.C. Zane, or Blending Numerology, Astrology, Numerology, and Tarot by Doris Chase Doan. But how do we understand the inner meanings of the minor arcanum? The inner meaning and deeper spiritual meanings of the minor arcanum are based on the decadence of the zodiac. Well, like what Paul asked earlier, what the heck is a decadent? The Egyptians gave us the rising sign or ascendant and the decadence. The word decadent begins with the prefix deca, meaning 10. Each zodiacal sign is 30 degrees. 30 times 12 equals 360 degrees, or a complete circle. Each zodiacal sign is further divided into 3 equal parts of 10 degrees each, called decadents. There are 3 decadents to each zodiacal sign, totaling 12 times 3, or 36 decadents. There are 9 majors, each anchoring 4 minors, totaling 36. Each decadent then corresponds to a constellation and the mythological story that is connected to it. Therefore, each card of the minor arcana corresponds to a constellation and corresponding mythological story. This all sounds a bit confusing for those who have not been introduced to decadence before. However, it will be crystal clear here in a moment. Let's take a look at the decadence as we traverse around the zodiac. You will notice that they follow a pattern. In Aries, a fire sign of the zodiac and ruler of the first house. Oops, oh my, sorry.
You're okay.
Actually, I'm not, because I have to go back here, I think. Oops. Okay. I meant to point here with this thing. There. Okay, now where was I? In Aries, a fire sign of the zodiac and ruler of the first house. There are 3 separate pieces here, each 10 degrees. There's Aries, 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 and then the Leo decadent of Aries, and the Sagittarius decadent of Aries. Now let's look at, I wonder if I could. Let's look at the 3 major arcana that correspond to these decadents. The Ace, or 1, shows the Aries, Aries symbol here. The 2, or second decadent, shows the Leo decadent of Aries. And 3, the third decadent, the card that corresponds with it, is the Sagittarius decadent of Aries. Now over up here in the right upper left-hand corners, we have the numbers of the card. And down here in the lower left-hand corner, we have the sub-rulership of the card. So Mars is the ruler of Aries, and these 2 correspond. The Sun is the ruler of Leo, so these 2 correspond. It is a sub-rulership. And Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius. So Jupiter is the sub-rulership of this card. You'll also notice that there are stars showing up in the background as patterns in these cards. And they actually represent what the constellation actually looks like in the sky. Finally, in the lower right-hand corner, we have just another symbol of what the card is. This is a scepter. Well, these are really just for decoration because it would look silly without something down there. Oh, yeah.
Good idea.
Yeah, you know, we need something down there. But actually, you know, there's the scepters right there, so we can clearly see that those are scepters. Okay, so okay, and here I just outlined what we just went through. These are the symbols on the minor, so I think we can go on. Now let's traverse the decadent and see the pattern. And I'm just going to show you how this works, and it's really quite simple. So we're going to go through. We already went through Aries. I'm hoping I pushed the right button. Here's Aries, and so it's always the first decadent is always that of the ruler of the sign. So it's always so in this case it's the Aries decadent of Aries. Then we go to the next fire sign, Leo decadent of Aries, Sagittarius decadent of Aries. Then we move here to Taurus, Earth sign. First of all, we have the Taurus decadent of Taurus. Then we have the next Earth sign, Virgo decadent of Taurus. And the last Earth sign, Capricorn decadent of Taurus. And we move along to the air sign. We have Gemini, Gemini. We have the next air sign, Libra decadent of Gemini. And the last air sign, Aquarius decadent of Gemini. We move to the water sign, ruled by Cancer. First, we have the Cancer decadent of Cancer. Then we move on to the next water sign, Scorpio. Scorpio decadent of Cancer. And last, we have the last water sign of the zodiac, Pisces decadent of Cancer. Here we move on to the fire signs. This time, It's the Leo decadent of Leo, the Sagittarius decadent of Leo, and the Aries decadent of Leo. These are all the names around here, are all the names of these different constellations that we are going to be talking about tonight, and you'll become more familiar with these names as we go throughout the course. Can you see the pattern? I know that the folks sitting with me in this room understand this quite clearly. I'm not sure if everybody out there in Streamland understands this. Please let me know if you don't, so we can move on with a good foundation. Okay, so if there are no further questions, we'll begin to explore the outer and inner meanings of each minor arcana, beginning with the ones or the aces. The magus and the four aces, or ones. Here we are reminded that the mundane or outer interpretations of the aces relate directly to Major Arcana 1. The magus, Major Arcanum 1, the magus. At our Church of Light convention in June of next year, I will be giving an hour-and-a-half presentation on just this one card. And if the truth were ever known to us, I'm sure that volumes could be written and have been written about the magus. But for the purposes of this class, we are going to have to keep the definition surrounding the major arcana very simple, or we'll never get through all this and it'll just become too cumbersome. For more information about each minor, again, refer to my class entitled Beginning Egyptian Tarot, or Sacred Tarot by C.C. Zane. So we can say that the magus is ruled by Mercury. He symbolizes the whole or unity. He symbolizes the beginning, as he is the first major arcana. And he symbolizes the use of consciousness, logic, reason, and will. His key words are I am, and he is regarded as a masculine positive energy. Each element refracts through the prism of the magus in its own way. The Ace of Scepters, the outer meanings. The first minor that we'll be exploring is the Ace of Scepters. You won't have to write these down, remember. So just know that these are always available to you. The key phrase for the outer meaning of this card is news of a business opportunity, which is usually what it means when you're doing a reading. Other key phrases might be business activity of a mental nature. Well, here we're obviously combining the business or the heat, passion of business and authority and venture and daring and all it takes to be in business with the mental activity of Mercury. So that's how those two combine.
So the business is the fire element?
Yes, the business part is the fire element. Now, the second interpretation might be business trip. Here we have Mercury, short journeys, right?
Mercury rules third house.
And, yeah. And also, a business trip could be, and the idea of a mental activity is also kind of a trip, you know, in your own head. A business conference, again, communications is all about Mercury. The last one could be a telephone call. Something as simple as a telephone call. The element of fire and beginnings as represented by the number 1. Yes, everybody gets that. Now, you don't have to remember all these interpretations. First of all, they are all available to you to ponder because they are in books. And secondly, these are just examples of how mercurial influences, the newness or beginnings of the number 1, the element of fire, and the circumstances surrounding the readings can be combined to come up with an interpretation. Granted, it's a lot to consider. I always start with the key phrase, news of a business opportunity, and I take it from there. I included only 5 of the suggested outer meanings of this card as outlined in Doris Doan's book. And throughout the course, we'll only note 5 outer interpretations. Any comments or questions?
That's great.
Before we go on to the meaning, the inner meaning of this card, I want to say a few words about the inner meaning of the minor arcana in general. Most of the time, the minor arcana means just that. It's minor. Whenever the outer meaning or exoteric meaning does not make sense in a reading, then it's time to turn to the esoteric meanings of, or inner meanings of the card. Sometimes if you're reading for yourself, and hopefully you know pretty much what's going on with yourself, you can see that both meanings are relevant. Remember though that most of the time the minors mean that the issues at hand are day to day and not internalized per se. However, in reality, trying to understand a deep and troubling question, these inner meanings can provide very powerful insight. Having said that, I'm going to spring another bombshell on you. The decadents themselves also have inner and outer meanings. Their outer meanings are based on the astrological influence of the decadent. The inner meanings and spiritual meanings of the decadents stem from the mythic story of the corresponding constellation. Don't worry just yet. It will become clearer as we go along, because you'll begin to see a pattern with these cards as we traverse. But when we start out, it's always a little difficult to get our heads around this. In Doris Chase Doan's book, if you have it, you'll note that the first interpretation is the outer meaning, and the second interpretation given is always the inner key word, or the meaning for the inner keyword, and the spiritual meanings are not given in her book. So let's begin with the Ace of Scepters, inner meaning. And this is the good part, folks. This is really fun. When we start talking about these stories and these constellations, this is when it really gets to be fun. And we get to understand how truly wonderful these minors are. You know, that they're great. They're great in reading tarot, and we know that when we see an abundance of minors in spread, we know that, okay, the situation's not a big deal. It's not a benchmark on a person's, life right now, whatever the question is. But there are times when these cards do really have an impact on the reading. The Ace of Scepters corresponds to the first 10 degrees of Aries, right? And we talked about that just a minute ago, which is in the sign of Aries and decadent of Aries and sub-ruled by Mars. This esoteric meaning corresponds to the constellation of Triangulum. The key word for the inner meaning of this card is activity. The first decadent of the zodiac is special because it is first, and because it is the only decadent represented by a geometric figure, the triangle, and not a heroic figure of mythology or a creature or thing of some sort. It has been pointed out many times that the number 3 is the first number that can be represented by a geometric shape, and that makes much sense to me as we go along and learn about this card. 1, I guess, could be symbolized by a circle, but that symbol is taken by 0, eternity, and spirit. 2 can only stand in opposition to each other, or it can be placed in a crux, but that is not a geometric figure. But we can combine 1 and 2 by a single line to form the symbol of 3, a triangle. As Zane points out, it is also interesting to note that each decadent of the zodiac is a 10-degree piece of a 360-degree pie, and therefore each decadent forms a 10-degree triangle. So when we combine a positive male force with a negative female force, and I don't mean that in a sexist way, and I think you all know that out there, we are given the opportunity for a third force. In the Church of Light tradition, as well as in many other traditions, it is recognized that the domestic triangle provides an opportunity for creation, procreation, developing familial love, and character development, or just the opposite, destruction on all levels. Zane says, quote, "The interaction of two forces, the diverse pull of polarity, has a potency in either of two directions. It may either build up or tear down, be devoted to creation or destruction, or turned into channels which disrupt and destroy," end quote. We've all had relationships like that, haven't we? Nevertheless, Zane continues, this interaction or polarity generates movement. In fact, no movement, physical, mental, or spiritual, ever takes place apart from the union of positive and negative potencies. The triangle also is a universal symbol of the mind, and the Magus tells us that everything that is manifested first begins as a thought. Also, at the base of every movement, every action, every creation or destruction, there is a thought, a divine spark, and in a sense, a triangle. The importance of a Trinity in the beginning of everything has been recognized in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost of Christendom, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva of the Hindus, and Osiris, Isis, and Horus of ancient Egypt. Is it not fitting, therefore, that the beginning of our zodiac of decadence begins with this symbol of eternal action? This decadent reminds us that it is only through the proper union of polarities that we are able to make progress. And although there must be some allowance for the destruction of the old to make way for the new, if the old is destroyed too quickly or completely, there may be insufficient power to recover. The key word for triangulum is activity. And the spiritual text is, all life, thought, and action are the product of the union of positive and negative potencies. So how would we interpret this inner meaning if it came up in a reading? We would interpret it as we would interpret all all inner meanings of the minor arcanum as advice or food for thought. We would begin to think about positive and negative energies and how they are working together or not, how creation and destruction are interacting within the context of the question. We would think about action, activity, enthusiasm, zeal, the importance of cooperation, and ultimately the union of body, mind, and spirit, or the wholeness of the number one. Any ideas about this? We've certainly been all in relationships, for example, where we're not working together, that the male and female negative positive thing is just constantly rubbing against the grain. And we've also been in relationships that are so creative. We found our soulmate, and every time we get with that person, good things happen. Can't help it.
Well, does the creativity come from the fact that you have the two energies that are interacting, and they're working on this third?
Yes.
Possibility,
this word possibility,
rather than pulling asunder,
right.
They've got that third
That's
energy
exactly
that they're focused on.
That's right. That's right. They're working towards, they can't help but create movement, and that movement is either going to create something new, or it's going to destruct whatever is there, or disintegrate. Yeah.
Huh.
The next of the aces that corresponds to Arcanum 1, the Magus, is the Ace of Cups. This card reflects the light of the Magus through the prism of water. The key esoteric phrase for this card is a message from a loved one. This card could mean a phone call, email, letter, skywriting, other exoteric interpretations might be an emotional conversation. Again, we have this love, emotional aspect of the cups with the conversation of Mercury. That's how or the communications of Mercury. A new love interest, the beginnings of something new. Travel concerned with domestic affairs. The travel associated with Mercury connected with domestic emotional love or familial love. A sympathetic mental term, a mood demanding analysis. So again, we are combining the analytical and mental urges of Mercury and new beginnings with emotional issues. The esoteric or inner meaning of this card is symbolized by the constellation Canis Minor in the sign of Cancer and decanate of Cancer ruled by the moon. Okay, let's look at this little guy. He's cute. He's friendly looking, tail wagging and everything. The spiritual text here, the wages of sin is death. Yikes. That doesn't seem right. But look at this little dog. Does he look that dangerous? He reminds me of a little sidekick that tugs at the pants of the fool in other decks. And there you see him in the Rider Waite deck right next to him. Sometimes he even pulls the pants down. I've seen decks where he's pulling their pants down. Well, we as humans, and fools I might add, have been palling around with dogs for some 40,000 years now. We've actually evolved together and would not be the humans we are today without the company, protection, hunting, and hauling skills of dogs. Yes, dogs are like family to us. Which reminds me that there are two other dogs in the deck. The dogs found in Arcanum 18, the moon. These dogs, here they are, pictured on the moon, are like family too, because we know from our study of the moon that it is usually a friend or family member that will do you harm in a domestic situation. In other decks, there's usually a happy little dog that looks like this one, or there's a more dangerous looking dog like a wolf. Both of them are dangerous, one because it will bite and the other because it will deceive. You'll notice upon careful examination that even though our Canis Minor seems to be cute and fluffy and wagging his tail, he doesn't have a friendly expression. Take a look. And there's a couple of teeth showing. Maybe he's a combination of those two dogs pictured in the moon. There are several different mythologies surrounding Canis Minor, but I like the Christian approach as outlined by Zane the best. He writes, quote, "Cancer is the first of the watery signs and thus relates to baptism." Then Zane goes on to equate Canis Minor as the forerunner of Canis Major in the heavens, with John the Baptist as the forerunner of Jesus. He makes that comparison. As you will recall from the story, John the Baptist warned Herod of the evil consequences to follow his domestic sins. Remember, Herod bedded his sister-in-law, and after John cast blame on both of them, the sister-in-law became angry. At Herod's birthday party, his sister-in-law's daughter did a crazy wild dance in 7 veils. I imagine taking many of them off. And Herod, so beside himself with arousal, promised the young dancer anything she wanted. Unfortunately for John the Baptist, her wish was his head on a silver platter. Zane writes, quote, "And it is not amazing, and it is not amazing. I think he needs to say, and is it not amazing, as the power of the sun is cut off as soon as it reaches the family decadent of the family sign, that John lost his head through a plot involving the whole domestic group. When we think of this little dog, our loyal friend, our trusted family member, and remember that our greatest opportunity for treachery and deceit lies within a domestic situation, it becomes clear that moods, the key word for the esoteric meaning of this card, warns us against mood swings and irrational behavior, especially in the home. But the last and most powerful meaning comes to us again through a passage written by Zane. Quote, "The feelings which are present as the companions of thought determine the type of compound which is formed in the thought cells of the structure of the finer body. Treachery, sooner or later, brings a reward of sorrow through the events attracted by the thought cells thus formed. Hate gnaws at the very bones of the hater, attracting malice from others. Ever-changing moods and fretful inconstancy within the domestic circle attract a train of woes that consumes the energy and leads eventually to some disaster. The wages of sin is death." And that's how we come to that inner meaning. And I will remind you of a news story just last month where here in Albuquerque, a couple who had been fighting apparently for months, she worked at one of the big concern down here with many other employees, and her boyfriend came to shoot her and shot other people. And I don't remember if he shot himself or not, but I think he shot himself. And so there's a real good example there, and we see it all the time in the news of these relationships that gnaw at each other until finally some horrible thing happens. And it's all about this domestic situation and how moods must really be tempered, if not anywhere else, certainly at home. We're going to finish the aces, and then we'll take a break. Just as the Ace of Scepters is an expression of Arcanum 1, the Magus, through the prism of fire, and the Ace of Cups through the prism of water, the Ace of Coins is an expression of Arcanum 1 through the prism of air. The key phrase for the outer or exoteric meaning of this card is a short journey. Other exoteric interpretations might be money from the sale of a manuscript, writing or lecturing for money, manuscript writing, Mercury, writing or lecturing for money, coins, money, friendly conversation, union of ideas, money, ideas, beginnings, money for artistic endeavors, because this card is ruled by Venus, thoughts about artistic endeavors, a new bank account, anything that might tie in the correspondences between Arcanum 1 Mercury, Libra, and Venus. Any questions about that? This should be starting to make some sense now. The Ace of Coins esoteric meaning is derived from the constellation Serpens in the sign of the Libra decadent of Libra ruled by Venus. This constellation is pictured in the heavens as a serpent about to strike and represents where the summer and winter joins in marriage. The theme of positive and negative forces joining to create action is repeated over and over again throughout Tarot, and this is another example. Because there are 186 days in summer, the season of light and knowledge, and fewer days, 179 in winter, the season of darkness and ignorance, the tug and pull of these extremes will favor summer, or the action of evolving. The serpent will often lift his head skyward to a plane above his body, which he's doing here. Near serpent's head is a spiral loop. They don't show it in this picture, indicating creative powers and evolution. The loop near its tail suggests a retrogressive use of creative energy. Again, the message is that progressive evolution is the result of the pull exerted by extremes, that tugging, always striving toward the light. The spiritual text or esoteric meaning of this card is, in matters of philosophy and in matters of action, the true course usually lies somewhere between advocated extremes. The key word for the esoteric meaning is policy. While researching for this class, it occurred to me at this point that maybe I could come up with better words for myself, and of course, we are all free to do that. I think temperate might work for me. And you might think about other keywords that may work for you. It's 7:30 now, and since I'm running out of notes and need to get some more, I think this is a good time for a 10-minute break. So we'll see you in 10 minutes. Thanks.
Right.
And also, ladies and gentlemen out there in Streamland, these little cards, which you get every month in the mail. And this one's hot off the press, booties. Am I on yet?
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
right.
you are.
They're moving it around.
Oh, well, here it is. Well, there, see? These are the decadent cards.
Thank you.
This is what we're talking about tonight, and I've been using these cards in tangent with the other two books to come up with this stuff.
Course 10.1 has
Yeah, delineating them.
all delineated, right, has all the decadence.
Exactly. That's where I've been working
The
from.
first two chapters are right, yeah.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great book.
Yeah.
It has all these stories in it. Okay. The last of the aces is the Ace of Swords. Remember that the swords are the ancestors to our spades in today's playing cards. So this card would be equal to the Ace of Spades. And we all know what that means from watching fortune-telling gypsies in Hollywood movies. The death card, right? Everybody goes, ooh. Well, even though
Is that what the death card is?
in the old movies, yeah, in the old gypsy movies, the ace, the stroke of 12, your blood will boil, and they throw an ace of, they throw an ace of spades on the table, and everybody's ooh. Well, even though the key phrase for the esoteric meaning of this card is news of sickness or death, we would not ever forecast death for fear of a self-fulfilled prophecy. But we would forecast, perhaps, the following: illness, trouble with your mail, I love that one.
Yeah, right.
Struggle to gain organization, a depressed turn of mind, inability to communicate fluently, or just plain bad news.
Yeah.
All of these are taken directly from blending astrology, numerology, and tarot. And as you look through these suggestions, think about the influence of Mercury and Capricorn combined.
Right. Well, you could, yeah.
Did you want to say something?
Well, I just think that's so much fun to put all that together.
Well, it just is. It is just so much fun. The inner or esoteric meaning of the Ace of Swords is held in the first degree of Capricorn, which is the sign of Capricorn and decadent of Capricorn, sub-ruled by Saturn, and symbolized by the constellation Cygnus. Cygnus, which way did I go? Which way did I go?
One more. Oh, that's beautiful. Go back one more just for a minute.
Go back one more?
Yeah. Yeah. No. Now I'll go back to Cygnus.
Okay, hold on. Okay.
Cygnus is Latin for swan, and this constellation is pictured in the heavens by a swan migrating from the frozen northlands towards warmer southern climes, just as the winter solstice in Capricorn harkens warmer days to come. Swans are the first of the migratory birds to return in spring. They are born and reared in the icy and perilous conditions of the north, but when grown to adult size, migrate to sunnier and warmer conditions in the south at the onset of winter. Zane writes, quote, "Like some friends we have known, loved ones who already have passed, they leave the scenes of their early hardships and wing their way to sunnier skies," end quote. Because swans in the northern hemisphere are predominantly white, graceful, and have tremendous wingspans, they are often likened to angels or messengers from a brighter realm, bringing news of loved ones and telling something of the surroundings there, where we too will one day reside. The conditions of the afterlife, as told by Cygnus, are much the same as ours, except that the substance of the astral world can be molded by the application of thought. The spiritual text for this constellation is, under certain conditions, the stone is rolled from the entrance to the tomb, and man consciously exchanges ideas with those who have entered the chamber of death. But I prefer another reflection of Zane, in which he writes, quote, "Whether from the standpoint of the physical world or from that of the afterlife worlds, the most important things of life are man's thoughts, desires, and ambitions. For here and hereafter, they are the factors determining his destiny," end quote. In other words, if our thoughts, desires, and ambitions are directed positively, every environment offers opportunity for spiritual advancement and new opportunities. Like the swan, harbingers of spring and a well-defined V formation, people born under this decadent tend to be the forerunners of better conditions and realize better than any other the value of system and organization to effect change. The key word for this card is therefore organization. From the key word, we can gather that the need for organization, the lack of organization, or an appreciation of system applied to all things could be considered if this card should turn up in a reading. Life is about overcoming obstacles, and we must learn to properly use our thoughts, desires, and ambitions, coupled with a strong sense of system and organization to achieve our goals. You know, when you think about life coaches, life coaching, very popular these days, the first thing they'll tell you is get your house in order. That's the very first thing they'll tell you. Because if you can't find things, if you can't find your car keys, if you don't know that that dress you wanted to put on today is in the dirty clothes hamper, if you don't know that your hair dryer doesn't work until you have to use it at the last minute like I did today, it can really mess you up. So, the idea is to just get everything, make a place for everything and put everything in its place and know that that's there. Fix all the broken things in your house that bother you. Get those shoes repaired, get your house clean, get your yard so it looks fine and there aren't fire conditions around the house. And then you're more likely to achieve your goals. Any questions or comments on this before we go on to the twos?
So that comes from the keyword organization?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
The twos, sometimes called deuces, are anchored by the second major arcana, veiled Isis. Veiled Isis is ruled by Virgo. Just the opposite of Major Arcanum 1, the Magus. She represents 2, polarity and duality. She represents the subconscious, intuition, remembering, and non-communication. Her key phrase is I analyze, and as such, she also represents science, labor, and analysis. Her energy is considered feminine and receptive. The key phrase for the outer meaning of the Deuce of Scepters is business and scientific methods. Other key phrases or interpretations might be obstacles resolved through analysis, esteem of co-workers, bring order to personal and or business habits, service for business reasons. The exoteric meaning for this card corresponds to the Leo decadent of Aries and the constellation of Eridanus. I don't know. I think it's Eridanus.
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 Who knows? I always say Eridanus, but either one could be right. Never looked it up.
Well, tonight we'll call it Eridanus. The first decanate of Aries, if you will recall, was represented by a triangulum, which suggested the powerful creative energy of a domestic triangle. This decanate of Aries concerns itself again with creative forces as represented by a body of water. In this case, the starry river Eridanus of the heavens. Zane tells us that the significance of the Leo decadent of Aries is clearly set forth in the second verse of the Bible when he writes, quote, "The land can bring forth only when united to water. So in the story of creation, as soon as heaven and earth were manifest, the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." That is, water is used to symbolize the medium or agent through which the exalted Spirit of God accomplished his purpose. End quote. The starry river Eridanus pictures a decanate whose sub-influence Leo rules enjoyment, love, and the production and care of children, suggesting emotion, the single characteristic most common to these activities. Emotion is the key word for the watery signs and water. And it is water that has been used as the universal symbol of those mental states that cause and carry a ripple through the nervous system, the body, the astral, and ultimately the spiritual plane to build a spiritual body. Those born under this decanate have a persistent ambition for power. Zane writes in delineating the horoscope that, quote, "The heart is somewhat joined to the head, and the more this union is cultivated, the better. For the greatest lever for attainment is noble affection." So again, the key esoteric word for this decanate is exaltation. But if, after having studied the material, you would like to call it exalted love or noble affection, then you can make those notes on your cards to help you remember. You know that I have no trouble writing on my cards, and now that I have gone through this class, it's a great time for me because I just got a new deck, a new colored deck. And after learning about the minors more deeply from having this experience of teaching the class, I'm ready to mark my cards differently this time. But I will not hesitate to mark my cards because I can't remember all this stuff. The spiritual text is, "The fountain of immortal life springs from man's emotional nature, the vibrations of exalted love having a rate sufficiently frequent to affect spiritual substance and build a spiritual body." Any questions at this point? Speaking of emotions, let's now turn our attention to the Two of Cups. The key phrase for the outer meaning of this card is work of love. The work part is from Arcana 2, veiled icy symbolizing labor, combining with the love part coming from the cups. Other combinations or interpretations might be romantic impulses, love of home, scientific methods used in the home. Believe me, I said that in a reading one time, and it was true. I couldn't believe it. I said, "Are you a scientist working in the home?" And she said, "Yeah." I mean, it stunned us both. Love of research and a perfect union, and reciprocal love, which is the weight decks, pretty much the weight decks interpretation with the man and the woman holding the cups up. The key word for the esoteric meaning of the Two of Cups is revelation, and is based upon the Scorpio decanate of Cancer and the constellation of Hydra. Hydra is a giant water serpent extending a third of the way around the celestial sphere. We all know about ourselves and other people, and probably more about other people, that we as humans have character traits that are not very compelling or appealing, or that we as humans may envision ourselves as grander or weaker than the rest of the world may perceive us. There are hundreds of these character flaws that rear their ugly heads from time to time, marring an otherwise pleasant personality. Jung calls these darker traits our shadow, and warns that if our shadow energy is not acknowledged and moved into more positive channels, these darker traits will show up again and again in different areas of our lives. The story of Hydra further illustrates this idea, and here he is, Hydra and Hercules. According to Greek mythology, Hydra, the water serpent, had 9 heads. The number varies into the hundreds, actually. But only one of the heads was immortal, representing the drive of significance and survival. It was one of the 12 labors of Hercules to sever the heads of Hydra. In trying to do so, Hercules quickly realized that when he cut off a head, 2 heads immediately grew back to take its place. Hercules solved this problem with the aid of his constant companion Iolaus, who seared the open wounds with a hot iron to prevent another from growing. Zane writes, to apply this technique to character adjustment, it is important to realize that attempting to slay character traits through repression only results in other maladjustments. Instead, the most effective treatment is to apply the hot iron of discrimination and to sublimate the energy through wise appraisal, thereby directing energy to find full expression in more highly acceptable ways. The spiritual text for this card is not through slaying desire, but through sublimating it to a higher plane of manifestation. Do humans make soul progress? Perhaps another key phrase for the esoteric meaning of the Two of Cups could be sublimation. Sublimation actually means direct energy from the primitive to a more refined state. So in other words, when we're feeling angry and we just really want to vent, rather than, cutting up the living room sofa, or, kicking the dog or screaming at someone at home, you put your running shoes on and go outside and run. And that's sublimation. That's taking that energy and putting it somewhere else.
Is it also noticing that if you feel very intensely about something, that by trying to get to the bottom, or not running away from the feeling necessarily, that there's something, a story you need to reveal to yourself about yourself?
Yes, that often
might
works.
be the revelation.
Sure.
Trying to get to the bottom of what your true feelings are.
Right, Because if you don't get to the bottom of it, or you think you've solved it, you know, by putting a Band-Aid on it in one circumstance, it just shows up again somewhere else. And that happens a lot in relationships, where you'll get in a really terrible relationship. You'll get in a relationship with someone who is not good for you, but you're attracted to that person, and you don't figure out why you went into this relationship, why you were attracted to this. So you just move on after years maybe of trauma, and then you pick a person exactly like the first one you just left. I mean, that happens.
Right.
Because the problem has not been looked at square in the face and dealt with. The next two is the Two of Coins. Its outer meaning, key phrase, is money through hard labor. This doesn't necessarily mean that the querent will have to work in the salt mines and chip away rock piles for his wages, but it does mean that whatever money is earned will not come easily. There will be some work involved. Other possible interpretations of this card are financial gain through ingenuity, profitable partnership in marriage, reward through mental effort, and partnership in a scientific arena. There are, of course, many others listed in Doorstone's book. The inner or esoteric keyword for the Two of Coins is independence, and is based on the Aquarian decanant of Libra and the constellation of Draco. Draco is a dragon coiling its length about the polar star. During the time that Draco's brightest star, Thuban, was the pole star, it would have appeared to ancient sky watchers of the northern hemisphere that the Earth revolved around Draco. Therefore, dragons, serpents, and snakes, oh my, often played a role in creation myths. In these stories, the gods would often battle such creatures for control of the earth. When defeated, the dragons were flung into the heavens. Draco is one of the earliest constellations to have been defined. The ancient Egyptians identified it as Taweret, and I can't say that word, but it's T-A-W-A-R-E-T, the goddess of the northern sky. Taweret was considered ever vigilant because the constellation never set, and she was depicted as a fierce, protective goddess whose body was a composite of crocodile, human, lioness, and hippopotamus parts. Now, I thought this was real interesting, this slide here, because does anybody recognize that statue? Well, you guys obviously aren't TV watchers, but that statue is from Lost, you know, the big serial show that everybody's gotten so involved with, and that's the statue on the island where those people have been stranded after their airplane crashed. And Egyptophiles and Lost fans have noticed a similarity between that statue and Taweret, and put it up on the net, and I thought that was really kind of clever, that they both have the same feet, and appear to have the same headdress. This one is a little more artistic than the Egyptian. Zane writes, quote, difficulties are not overcome by weakness, or is accomplishment made without aggression and courage. But when the abilities and possibilities developed in the fierce struggle of its animal past are turned to purposes which have for interest the welfare of all, does that soul cease to function on the plane of brute and rise to something which we term divine? It has thus triumphed over the dragon, and its atonement is complete. When the dark peril is past, the ego can find no joy in the pain or discomfort of any living thing. The spiritual text thus emerges. Deal justly, even with thy enemies, for it is better to suffer evil than to retaliate with vengeance. So let's return to the key word of this decadent, independent. Unlike the other key words for the esoteric messages of these cards so far, this one doesn't seem to match up. That's because the Aquarius decadent of Libra differs from the other decadents due to its sub-influence of Uranus, expressing qualities of originality and even eccentricity. So frequently, originality and eccentricity are not received well in the world, and opposition may ensue. Then it is incumbent upon the individual expressing originality and or eccentricity to either sublimate those qualities into more conventional outlets or remain independent. And that's where that comes from. Any questions or comments? The last two that is anchored to veiled Ices is the Two of Swords. Its mundane key phrase is sickness through overwork. Other suggested interpretations could be obstacles overcome by love, mental development through struggle, difficult road to success, and marital trouble.
You know what? That's Four of Swords.
You know what? I knew that would happen somewhere in this. And I knew somebody would point that out to me. And I would say, wow, you know what? That happened. I apologize, and I'll fix that next time. Can we just pretend that's
a
the
Two of Swords?
Yeah, it's a Two of Swords.
So what would be the astrological on the Two of Swords? Let's see.
Okay, well, the astrological, it's based on the Taurus decadent of Capricorn, not the Taurus decadent.
Okay, got it.
Okay, yeah. And the constellation is Delphinus.
Okay.
Okay. Delphinus is pictured in the heavens as a dolphin. I was lucky enough to swim with wild dolphins over 9 days off the southwestern shores of Australia in 1990. And the experience was absolutely remarkable, to say the least. It was one of the most amazing experiences I ever had, swimming in the ocean with big 8-foot dolphins, surrounded by them. It was amazing. And I learned that these creatures seem to show many human characteristics. They, first of all, they're mammals like us, and they breathe air. That's how you can set them apart from sharks, because their fins go up and down in the water. They have to come up, and they come up and go down. And sharks just do this. You know, and a lot of people don't know the difference, and they get in a lot of trouble. Dolphins are curious, intelligent, loyal, social, and they exhibit familial love, even between generations. We had one dolphin show up every day with her granddaughter, and would escort her around. And we could almost hear that the baby had to stay outside of where the adult dolphins came in to interact with the humans. And the baby was told, apparently, by grandma, you stay out there. And so the baby dolphin would swim back and forth on the other side of the rope. It was really adorable. They can also be said to communicate through a language like humans, and dolphins can be entertained. The wild dolphins I swam with were not fed. They came there just because they knew there were people there that wanted to entertain them. And that was they just did it for fun, and it was just really an amazing experience. Knowing this about dolphins, is it any wonder that many legends around the world portray dolphins as beneficent sea creatures and saviors of men, saving the lives of humans, particularly those who are endangered in some sort of just and noble cause. Thus, the key word for the esoteric meaning of this card is martyrdom. This is one of the simplest connections to make so far in the study of the esoteric meanings of the minors. Even the outer meaning, sickness through overwork, could imply martyrdom by working too hard for the benefit of others. But there is another aspect to the inner meaning of this card, and one of the stories Zane writes about illustrates the spiritual message of the card perfectly. Oh, I must hit these too fast. It is the Greek story of Hesiod, who is up there in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, who was a famous poet. Hesiod was killed by assassins and his body thrown into the sea. But the dolphins, who are friends of poets and all who are benefactors to the human race, recovered Hesiod's body from the depths of the ocean and swam it ashore, where he could be discovered by his friends. Hesiod's friends, in turn, tracked down the murderers until they were captured. Then the murderers were thrown into the sea to receive as punishment exactly the same kind of death they had caused the poet. Zane's comments upon this story relay that it is not always possible in this life or in the hereinafter to make complete restitution to the person who has been wronged. But those souls who focus their attention, desires, and efforts upon making restitution to those people they have harmed, or at least through some commensurate service to society, will thereby release their finer bodies from the weight of their transgressions, thus avoiding a drop to lower vibratory spheres in the astral. The spiritual message of this card is: man, by his thoughts, his emotions, and his actions on earth, builds for himself a home in a higher realm where he will dwell after passing from the physical plane. Other key words for the inner meaning of this card could be restitution, amends, or repentance. I want to show you this beautiful picture here. It's kind of hard to see, but there are dolphins carrying Venus here. There's a dolphin over there, and a dolphin on the other side carrying Venus on a half shell. And I put her there because she's a lot prettier than Hesiod. I thought she was much more entertaining.
There you go.
Any questions about the twos before we move on to the threes? Major Arcana 3 is Isis unveiled. Veiled Isis the Virgin is now pregnant in the image of Isis unveiled. We learn from Triangulum that all activity springs forth from the union of positive and negative forces. Here, the action is gestation and creation. Ruled by Libra, the key words for Isis unveiled is marriage and action. The outer meaning for the Three of Scepters is business partnership. Business relating to scepters and partnership as another way to express the marriage aspect of Isis unveiled. Some other combinations and interpretations for this card could be jovial disposition. That would be a combination of Libra, Sag, and Jupiter. Take action for the future, action keyword. Business gains through social activity, Libra. Advertising activity, action, Sag, and Jupiter. The astrological meaning of the Three of Scepters is based upon the Sagittarius decanate of Aries, sub-ruled by Jupiter. Keyword, propaganda. In this day and age, when we hear the word propaganda, we think of the dissemination of information that is meant to create public opinion favorable to certain ends, regardless of their merit. Another word for propaganda today is spin. But the original meaning of this word was simply the dissemination of news or ideas. Those born under this decanate are seen to have great enthusiasm for ideas and plans and an ability to infuse this enthusiasm into others. They are not content to just sit quietly with some bit of information they deem worthwhile. They must broadcast it, such as I am doing now as a Sagittarian myself. It is my big idea to create this class so that I could broadcast this information to those sitting out there and sitting here with me. Us Sages are also quick to attack falsehood and corruption and love to make it known to the world exactly what our truths are. Sagittarian rules a ninth house of long journeys, teaching, preaching, publishing, radio broadcasting, and today, perhaps, blogging. So, perhaps broadcast or dissemination may be helpful keywords in addition to propaganda to help remember this meaning. The spiritual teaching of this card is based upon the epic story corresponding to the constellation of Perseus. The hero Perseus decided to rid the world of the evil Medusa, whose hair was serpents and so frightening in appearance that anyone who looked upon her was immediately turned to stone. The goddess Minerva aided Perseus in his effort by furnishing him with a shield so highly polished that he was able to approach the Medusa while only viewing her reflection in his shield. That shield doesn't look that highly polished, but you get the meaning of the story. In this way, Perseus was able to get close enough to the Medusa to sever her head while she slept. Zane writes about this story, quote, No greater wisdom was ever uttered in the reference to character building than is thus dramatically presented. Impure thoughts and unworthy desires not only harden the individual, but they thrive and prosper to the extent attention is paid to them. Attention to the things we fear works the same way. Attention to anything positive or negative works the same way. The story of Perseus shows us that if there is something that we're thinking about or fearing, focusing attention on something else very persistently allows no room for the undesirable to flourish. Perseus went on to escape the treachery of Medusa's sisters and save the life of Andromeda from the clutches of the sea monster Cetus. Zane writes in conclusion, the exploits of Perseus, each in symbolic language, conveys an important message. But most important of all, he accomplished the work himself. The spiritual text thus portrayed, therefore, is, there is no vicarious atonement. Each soul is a responsible being, working out its own deliverance from the thraldom inherited from ancestry and forced upon it by environment. What does vicarious atonement mean? It means somebody else has to do it, right? Vicarious. Zane says there is no vicarious atonement. We have to do it ourselves. And I think therein lies the big difference between Christianity and our tradition and in other traditions where someone dies, for example, on our behalf to save us. We have to save ourselves. We have to save ourselves. Did you all hear that? I'm getting a message from the director. Okay. Any questions about this card? Okay, the outer meaning of the key phrase of the Three of Cups has a lovely sentiment. Marriage for love. Marriage, of course, a reflection of Arcana 3, and love a reflection of the cups. Examples of other interpretations for this card are romantic activity, ideals realized through positive action, devotion to family, a warm friendship, and unbridled emotions. Can we all see that in these cards pretty easily? The astrological meaning of this card is based upon the Pisces decanate of Cancer, sub-ruled by Neptune. There will be emotional and stormy lives for those under this decanate, but a tranquil and a level head, as the saying goes, will prove to be their life jacket. While loving the domestic life, they are also eager to investigate just what's below the horizon or beyond the horizon, leading them into unexplored territory to spy upon Mother Nature's secret. The key word for this decanate is research. The spiritual message for the Three of Cups is based upon the constellation of Argo, the Grecian ship that carried Jason and his Argonauts across the stormy seas and strange encounters in search of the Golden Fleece, symbolizing eternal life. During their journeys, they came upon clashing islands, an army of brandishing skeletons, intoxicating and deadly sirens, and finally a dragon. Zane explains that those psychic adventurers who dabble in seance rooms or other forms of passive psychic investigation, like the Ouija board, automatic writing, or channeling, are surrendering control of themselves to entities about which they have no knowledge or control. Psychic research requires the development of senses that are not natural to the material plane and must be guided by an alert mind and by never relinquishing control of oneself to another. Like Jason and the Argonauts, each mariner should keep his hand firmly on the helm of his ship and maintain an even keel. The spiritual text is, poise is the one safe haven. I'll say that again. Poise is the one safe haven of the soul. Therefore, under all circumstances, keep an even mind. There's a maritime expression, keep an even keel, which means the same thing. Keep steady. What are some of the synonyms for the word poise? Balance, equilibrium, self-possession, composure, assurance, dignity, serenity, drawn up into readiness. He's poised for this, that, and the other thing. To steady, to hold, to support one's carry. That's a poise or a stance. To brace oneself. So all of those things mean to be command of your ship. Any questions?
So if you're going to go out there and do research, be poised?
Yes, be very poised. Be very poised in your research. It's just a good idea to be poised in general.
Well, it is. Well, and it's like, for some reason, what came to my mind was that movie, the movie that we watched on Sunday, and Paul was challenging us about being careful about, you've got to be poised. You've got to be, want to have a balanced position on things in order to try and get to the truth of it.
Well, yeah. Sure. And that comes more from the serpents thing, but that's pretty much the same, that the truth is somewhere in the middle, usually.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. This is interesting. Does anybody remember this movie? It was made in 1963, and now I'm dating myself. But it was Jason and the Argonauts, and I remember my dad took me to see it, and it was the first animated, like sci-fi animation I'd ever seen. And when I saw those skeletons come out with their swords and start fighting Jason, I was really scared. Really stuck in my head. So I thought, oh yeah, I'm gonna go dig up that image, and it's really fun. Google Image is so much fun.
I know it is.
It's just the greatest. You can find anything on Google Image. It's just amazing.
Right.
Okay, the next is the Three of Coins. Its key phrase for the outer message is marriage for money. Some of the other interpretations suggested in Doorstone's book are: gain through social activities, profit from partnerships, reward for creative endeavors, success in selling, compensation as a result of a business trip, money in the mail. I always like it when that happens. The inner astrological meaning for the Three of Coins is the Gemini decanate of Libra, subruled by Mercury. The key word for this decanate is expiation, which sounds a little like expire. To expire means to come to an end. To expiate means to put to an end. Expiate also means to atone for or pay the penalty for. Zane explains that those who are born under this decadent often possess keen minds, especially where literature and art are concerned. But as it is a decadent in the sign of partnership and open enemies next to the sign of death, Scorpio, there is sometimes a peculiar fatality associated with it. Those who are born under this decadent must carefully guard against their ability to exploit others in favor of their own interests, because these same people are more quickly called upon to pay a dreadful penalty for their sins. Talk about an ominous warning.
Ellen, your comment on Jason and the Argonauts? Neil said it was a great movie for its time.
Oh, it was a wonderful movie for its time. It was the best. I think it really created a sensation, actually, in the news media. You know, everybody was all excited about it. Zane relates the spiritual message of this card to the story of Little Red Riding Hood, which reminds that cunning and deceit are met with the woodsman's axe or the spear of Centaurus, as we see in the lower right-hand corner. Little Red Riding Hood, on an errand of mercy, escapes destruction. By her building thoughts of peace, joy, goodwill, and compassion for others, she builds a strong spiritual body, which no one can destroy. The spiritual message is, it is impossible for a man to injure another without injuring himself, or himself being injured, or for a man to benefit another without himself being truly benefited. Now, wasn't that a good bedtime story? Does anyone have any questions or comments before we move on to the last three, which I think will be the end of our class this evening? No questions or comments. I thought it was really neat how, you know, this Little Red Riding Hood story really does tie in with, you know, the story of Lupus and Centaurus killing the wolf. I thought that was really neat. The Three of Swords is the last card anchored by Isis Unveiled. The key phrase for the outer meaning of this card is lawsuit or divorce. In the threes, we clearly see a correspondence between the elements and the idea of marriage, don't we? Mm-hmm. Other suggested interpretations for this are discord in business partnership, social split, argument with a friend, struggle in business, antagonistic communication. The astrological meaning for this card is based upon the Virgo decadent of Capricorn, sub-ruled by Mercury, and the key word is idealism. People born under this decadent have a natural gift to grasp the ideal and express it in concrete form. They have powerful imaginations and ambitions to hard work. Oftentimes, they answer a special calling to organized religion, but especially excel when allowed to follow their own pursuits. They often communicate with interior planes and glean valuable information from that source, even though they may not be aware of it. The spiritual message of this card is based upon the constellation of Pisces Australis, a fish seen in the southern hemisphere's autumn skies. The evil Typhon, symbol of selfishness, made horrible advances to Venus, the goddess of love. And to escape his advances, Venus transformed herself into the fish seen immersed in the humanitarian stream of Aquarius. This symbolizes the idea that through the cultivation of the higher emotions, it is possible to communicate intentionally with members of the spiritual plane. Also, that those here on earth are the recipients of unimaginable love and wisdom coming to us from the spiritual plane. Zane writes, almost every person who is devoted to some noble work on the physical plane and for which there may be support of the invisible brethren discovers that in times of crisis they have been helped. The Bible story of Peter here, which is shown in the big picture off to the right, casting his hook into the waters and drawing forth a fish which held a piece of money in its mouth, is the perfect example of this phenomenon. Have you ever had this kind of experience? This reminds me that a long time ago I had $1 and change to buy dinner for 2 people. And I was on my way to the grocery store wondering what in the world I was going to buy for dinner for $1 and change. You know, a can of stew, and, you know, maybe I had some rice at home or something. You know, I was thinking about it. And on my walk to the neighboring grocery store, I found a dirty old $5 bill in the gutter. And it seemed to me like $1 million at the time. Whoa! Here I was trying to figure out how to make dinner with, you know, $1.25, and now I had a whole $5. It was like amazing. It was like the money just dropped out of the sky somehow. And so anyway, things like that do happen once in a while. So the spiritual messages from the inner planes. It is possible for man to attract any information whatsoever he is capable of utilizing. Now we can, that brings us actually to the 4th, so this is really a good place for us to stop this evening. So please join me next week, same time, same channel, and we'll carry on with these wonderful meetings in the minors. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you, Anna.